All the cleaning ladies quit on the same day, until she arrived and Melissa Wilson ran desperately through the halls of the mansion as the 8th employee in just 3 weeks threw her uniform on the floor and slammed the door on her way out. Ethan, her 4-year-old son, stood in the middle of the room with a mischievous grin on his face, surrounded by scattered toys and permanent marker stains on the freshly painted walls. Then, the doorbell rang and changed everything. The woman who appeared at the door didn't seem afraid of the challenge ahead. Dorothy Parker, 55 years old, listened patiently to the impossible behavior of the child and still accepted the job on the spot. "Mrs. Melissa, every child has a reason for acting this way," Dorothy said in a calm voice that contrasted with her employer's desperation. "You don't understand," Melissa sighed, running her hands through her dark hair. "Ethan has made 8 different women give up. He spills paint, hides cleaning supplies, even let my pet hamster loose in the dining room when we had guests." Dorothy watched the blonde boy who eyed her suspiciously from the top of the stairs. There was something in his blue eyes she recognized all too well. It wasn't malice, it was pain. "When can I start?" she simply asked. Melissa could hardly believe it. After so many refusals and resignations, someone was finally willing to try. On her first day, Dorothy arrived promptly at 7 in the morning. Margaret, the housekeeper of 2 years, greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you have better luck than the others," Margaret said, adjusting her spotless apron. "But I doubt you'll last a week. That boy is a terror." Dorothy just smiled and got to work. She picked up her cleaning supplies and headed to the living room, where the white walls were covered in colorful scribbles. Ethan appeared minutes later carrying a cup of grape juice. "Watch what happens to your work," the boy said, deliberately spilling the purple liquid on the floor Dorothy had just cleaned. Instead of yelling or complaining like the others, Dorothy simply picked up the cloth again and began wiping up the juice. Ethan was confused. Where was the anger, the frustration, the threats to tell his mother? "Why aren't you mad?" he asked, kicking a toy toward her. "Because you're testing whether I'll leave too," Dorothy answered without stopping her work. "And I won't. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Ethan stayed silent for a few minutes, watching the woman work. No one had ever understood his mischief that way before. Margaret always rushed to tell his mother everything, and the other cleaners left crying or shouting. Over the next week, Ethan intensified his pranks. He hid all of Dorothy's cleaning supplies under his bed. He put glue in her rubber gloves. He even released Popcorn, the golden hamster, just as she was vacuuming the living room rug. But something strange began to happen. Dorothy started leaving small, colorful notes in the places she cleaned, simple drawings of smiley faces, bright suns, and words like, "Thank you for letting me work here," written in careful handwriting. Ethan found the first note under his pillow. It was a drawing of a blonde boy with blue eyes holding the hand of a brown-haired woman. On the back it read, "Ethan is a special boy." Margaret, who had been watching from afar, shook her head in disapproval. "She's doing this all wrong," she muttered to herself. "That boy needs discipline, not coddling." But Melissa, who was watching everything through the security cameras in her office, noticed something different. Ethan still acted mischievously, but he spent more time observing Dorothy at work. Sometimes she saw him talking to the cleaning lady, something that didn't happen with anyone else. The situation changed completely on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan had grabbed his mother's favorite vase, a blue porcelain piece she'd received as a wedding gift, and threatened to throw it on the floor during one of his tantrums. "If you don't give me ice cream right now, I'll break it," he shouted, holding the vase above his head. That's when Dorothy did something no one expected. She sat on the living room floor and began to cry softly. Ethan stopped immediately, still holding the vase. He had never seen an adult cry because of him. Usually they yelled, threatened, or stormed off. But crying. "Why are you crying?" he asked, slowly lowering the vase. "Because I'm sad," Dorothy replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "That vase must be very important to your mother. If you break it, She'll be really hurt inside." "Hurt how?" Ethan moved closer, carefully placing the vase on the couch. "The way you feel when someone breaks something you really love." The boy grew thoughtful. He remembered when his favorite stuffed bear had torn, and he cried for days until his mother managed to sew it back. "I don't want to hurt Mom," he murmured. "Then why do you do these things?" Dorothy asked gently. Ethan didn't know how to answer. He sat beside her on the floor, something he had never done with any other staff member. Melissa, watching everything through the cameras, had to hold back tears. It was the first time in months she'd seen her son show genuine concern for someone else's feelings. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Dorothy stayed behind to tidy the living room. That's when she found, hidden behind the large leather couch, a photo album covered in black marker scribbles. When she opened it, she saw pictures of Ethan with a dark-haired man who had kind eyes. Every photo where the man appeared had been fiercely scratched out, as if someone wanted to erase that person from history. "What are you doing with that?" Dorothy turned and saw Margaret standing in the doorway, her face filled with panic. "I found it behind the couch," Dorothy explained. "Who is this man in the photos?" "No one important," Margaret said quickly, trying to take the album from Dorothy's hands. "Ethan scribbled all over it. I'll throw it away." "Wait." Dorothy held onto the album. "This man, he looks a lot like Ethan. Is he his father?" Margaret grew visibly nervous, fidgeting with her hands and avoiding Dorothy's gaze. "He was. But he left a year ago and never came back. Ethan gets like this whenever someone mentions his father." Dorothy flipped through the album carefully. She saw birthday photos, trips to the park, family moments that seemed happy. Why would a boy scribble out good memories of his own father? "Margaret, does Ethan know why his father left?" "Of course not," the housekeeper replied quickly. "A child doesn't need to know those things. What matters is that it's just the three of us here now." Something in Margaret's tone bothered Dorothy, but she decided not to press the matter further. She tucked the album into her bag and finished tidying the room. The next morning, Ethan's behavior was even more agitated. During breakfast, he deliberately knocked over his glass of milk and started screaming when Melissa mentioned she'd need to travel to New York the following week. "I don't want you to go," he wailed, throwing himself on the floor. "You'll leave too and never come back." Melissa was surprised by the intensity of his reaction. It was just a 2-day trip, something routine in her job as marketing director for a cosmetics company. "Ethan, Mommy always comes back from trips. You know that." "No, I don't," the boy shouted. "Dad also said he was coming back." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Melissa looked at Margaret, who quickly averted her gaze. "Ethan, your father," Melissa began but was interrupted. "I don't want to talk about him." Ethan ran to his room, slamming the door. Dorothy, who had witnessed everything, approached Melissa. "Mom, can I say something?" "Of course, Dorothy." "Ethan is afraid of losing you too. His mischief always happens when you mention work or trips." Melissa had never made that connection. Thinking about it, Ethan's worst tantrums really coincided with her professional commitments. "But he's always been a difficult child," said Margaret, appearing in the kitchen, "even before his father left." "Is that true?" Dorothy asked, watching both their reactions. Melissa hesitated. In truth, Ethan had only become troubled after Brian left the house. Before that, he'd been a happy, affectionate child. "Not exactly," Melissa admitted. "He changed after the separation." Margaret cleared her throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'll check on Ethan," she said, quickly heading upstairs. Dorothy noticed the housekeeper's haste to drop the subject. There were secrets in that house, and Ethan was paying the price for them. That afternoon, Dorothy decided to look for Ethan. She found the boy hiding under his bed, crying softly. "Ethan, can I come in?" she asked, kneeling beside the bed. "I don't want to talk," came the muffled reply. "That's okay. I'll just sit here in case you change your mind." Dorothy sat on the floor beside the bed and stayed quiet. After a few minutes, she heard Ethan shifting, and soon his little blonde head peeked out. "Why didn't you leave like the others?" he asked, his eyes red from crying. "Because I like working here. and I like you even when you're mischievous. But I'm a bad boy. Everyone says so. Dorothy's heart ached. Who had made this child believe he was bad? Ethan, do you want to know a secret? She said, reaching out to him. The boy nodded and crawled out from under the bed, sitting beside her. I used to be very mischievous too when I was little. Know why? Ethan shook his head. Because I was scared and sad, just like you are now. Scared of what? That the people I loved would leave and I'd be all alone. Ethan looked at her with interest. It was the first time someone had said they understood his feelings. Is that why you act out when your mom talks about traveling? The boy lowered his head and nodded. I think if I make her mad at me, she won't want to leave the house. She'll stay here yelling at me instead of going away. Dorothy hugged Ethan gently. You know what happens when you misbehave? Your mom gets worried and sad. She doesn't get mad because she doesn't like you. She gets mad because she cares about you. Really? Really? And you know what else? Your mom always comes back from trips because she loves you so much. But what if she doesn't? Like Dad? Dorothy took a deep breath. It was a hard question, but she felt Ethan needed honest answers. Ethan, do you know why your dad left? The boy shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. Margaret said he didn't like me and Mom anymore, that he left because I was too naughty. Dorothy felt anger rise in her chest. How could anyone say something like that to a child? Ethan, look at me, she said, gently holding his face. It wasn't your fault, do you understand? When parents separate, it's never the children's fault. But then why doesn't he come back to see me? I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know your mom loves you very much and will never abandon you. Ethan threw himself into Dorothy's arms and cried as he hadn't cried in months. She held him tightly, sensing she had finally reached the heart of the matter. At that moment, Margaret appeared at the bedroom door with a furious expression. Dorothy, Mrs. Melissa wants to speak with you. Now. The housekeeper's tone was threatening. Dorothy kissed Ethan's forehead and went downstairs to meet Melissa in the study. Dorothy, Margaret told me you've been asking Ethan questions about my ex-husband. Mrs. Melissa, Ethan was very distressed and... I didn't ask you to interfere with my son's upbringing, Melissa interrupted, visibly irritated. Family matters are none of your concern. Dorothy felt wronged but kept her composure. I apologize if I overstepped, but Ethan was suffering and I felt I needed to help him. Margaret handles Ethan's emotional needs perfectly well. You're here to clean the house, not play therapist. You're right, Ma'am, it won't happen again. But even as she agreed, Dorothy knew she couldn't ignore Ethan's pain. Something was wrong with this situation, and she was determined to find out what. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Dorothy noticed Margaret was always nearby when she spoke with Ethan. The housekeeper also began making negative comments about the boy's behavior in Melissa's presence. That boy is getting more spoiled by the day, Margaret said during dinner. Today he cried over nothing. Maybe he needs some medication to calm down. Dorothy nearly choked on her food. Medication? For a 4-year-old who was clearly emotionally struggling? Margaret, Ethan is too young for psychiatric drugs, Melissa said. It might just be a phase. Mrs. Melissa, I know a pharmacy that sells excellent natural sedatives for children. My sister gave them to her son, and they worked perfectly. Dorothy was alarmed. What kind of person suggested medicating a child without a doctor's prescription? I think we should talk to his pediatrician first, Melissa said, much to Dorothy's relief. Of course, Margaret quickly agreed. Just a suggestion. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Dorothy decided to investigate further. She went up to Ethan's room to check on him and found him having a nightmare. Don't go, Daddy. I promise I'll be good, the boy cried in his sleep. Dorothy gently woke him and soothed him back to sleep. As she was leaving, she heard voices coming from Melissa's study. It was Margaret on the phone. I know. But she's getting in the way of our plans. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet, but she keeps asking about Brian. Yes, I'll deal with her. Ethan is getting too attached and that can't happen. Dorothy's stomach turned. What plans was Margaret talking about? And why was Ethan's attachment to her a problem? She decided to hide in the hallway to listen further, but Margaret ended the call and went upstairs to her room. The next day, Dorothy arrived at work determined to uncover more about the family's past. While cleaning, she found crumpled papers in Melissa's office trash, drafts of emails to someone named Brian. Brian, Ethan asks about you every day. You could at least call him. He doesn't understand why you just disappeared. The emails had never been sent. Dorothy kept the papers and continued investigating. In Margaret's room, while changing the sheets, she found an old phone hidden in a drawer. Curiosity got the better of her and she turned it on. There were text messages from a number she didn't recognize. Margaret, thank you for handling everything. I know it wasn't easy convincing Melissa that it was better for me to step away. You did the right thing. Ethan will forget about me in time. I promise to make it up to you once things settle down. Dorothy nearly dropped the phone. Had Margaret manipulated the couple's separation? But why? She kept reading the messages and found something even more shocking. Brian, you need to understand that Melissa was never a good mother. Ethan needs someone who truly cares for him. I can be that person. Margaret, I just want what's best for my son. Then trust me, give it time for things to cool off. When Melissa gets tired of being a single mother, you can come back and we'll have a real family. Dorothy felt sick. Margaret was manipulating both parents, using Ethan as a pawn in a twisted game. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly put the phone away and resume her work. Margaret entered the room a few minutes later. Dorothy, what are you doing here? Changing the sheets, as always, Dorothy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret eyed her suspiciously, but said nothing. At lunch, Dorothy noticed Margaret had prepared a different juice for Ethan. What's this? The boy asked, sniffing the drink. It's a special juice to help you stay calm, Margaret explained with a forced smile. Dorothy remembered the conversation about medication and felt an alarm go off in her head. Ethan, how about drinking water today? She suggested. Too much juice isn't good for you. He needs to have it, Margaret insisted. It's good for him. I don't want it, Ethan said, pushing the glass away. Margaret looked visibly irritated, but didn't press further in Dorothy's presence. That afternoon, while Ethan played in the garden, Dorothy found a chance to speak with Melissa alone. Mrs. Wilson, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Dorothy. How did the separation happen? I mean, was it a mutual decision? Melissa took a deep breath and sat in the office chair. Honestly, it was all very confusing. Brian started saying I wasn't a good mother, that Ethan was becoming troubled because of me. He said it was better for him to step away so I could learn to raise our son alone. And you agreed? Not at first, but Margaret supported his idea. She said it really would be better for Ethan to have time alone with me, that Brian was a bad influence. Dorothy felt the puzzle pieces falling into place. Was Margaret working here before the separation? Yes, for 2 years. Why all these questions? It's just, Ethan seems to miss his father terribly. Maybe some contact, even by phone. No, Melissa interrupted. Brian was very clear. He wants no contact until Ethan is more mature. Have you tried calling him? Many times. But his number changed. Margaret said he asked not to be contacted. Dorothy decided to take a risk. Mrs. Wilson, what if I told you things might not be what they seem? What do you mean? Before Dorothy could answer, Margaret walked into the office without knocking. Sorry to interrupt. Ethan is crying in the garden. I think he had another episode. Melissa rushed out to see her son, leaving Margaret behind with Dorothy. You've been asking a lot of questions, Margaret said threateningly. I just care about Ethan. Your concern isn't needed. This family was doing just fine before you came. Doing just fine. Ethan was making every housekeeper quit. That's temporary. Children go through phases. Dorothy noticed Margaret was nervous. There was fear in the housekeeper's eyes. Margaret, can I ask you something? Why don't you want Ethan to have contact with his father? Because Brian abandoned that boy. A father who abandons his child doesn't deserve a second chance. But what if he had no choice? What if someone convinced him it was the best thing to do? Margaret's face turned red with anger. You know nothing about this family. You've been here 2 weeks and think you understand our situation? I understand Ethan is suffering needlessly. Ethan is learning that life isn't a fairy tale. Sometimes people leave and don't come back. But what if it doesn't have to be that way? Margaret stepped closer to Dorothy, her eyes blazing with fury. Listen carefully. You're here to clean the house. If you keep sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, I'll have to ask Melissa to fire you. And I guarantee she'll listen to me. Dorothy knew Margaret wasn't bluffing. The housekeeper clearly had influence over Melissa and would use it to eliminate any threat to her plans. That night, Dorothy had an idea. If Margaret had convinced Brian to leave, maybe she could find him and uncover the truth. She remembered the papers she'd found in the trash. Melissa had tried contacting Brian several times. His old number must be somewhere. She waited until everyone was asleep and quietly went downstairs to the office. She rummaged through drawers until she found an old phone book. There it was, Brian Wilson. Dorothy wrote down the number and returned to her room. She knew she was risking her job, but Ethan deserved to know the truth about his father. The next morning, during her break, Dorothy called the number. Hello? Brian Wilson? Yes. Who's speaking? My name is Dorothy. I work at Melissa's house and need to talk to you about Ethan. A long silence followed on the other end. Ethan, is something wrong with my son? The desperation in the man's voice was genuine, not the reaction of someone who'd willingly abandoned his own child. Mr. Wilson, can we meet? I need to speak with you in person. Of course. Where? They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Dorothy made up an excuse to Melissa about handling personal matters and left the house. Brian Wilson looked exactly like his photos, a kind-faced man with the same blue eyes as Ethan. He stood quickly when he saw Dorothy. How's my son? Were his first words. Mr. Wilson, I need you to tell me exactly what happened a year ago. Brian sighed and began his story, and I loved my family deeply. But Ethan was having behavioral issues and Margaret started convincing me I was the problem. She said he acted out when I was around, that my presence was harming his development. And you believed her? At first, no. But then Melissa began agreeing with Margaret, said I was too lenient with Ethan, that I didn't know how to raise a child. The arguments became constant. Who started those arguments? Brian thought for a moment. They always began when Margaret reported something Ethan had done that day. She exaggerated every little mischief, made our son sound like a little monster. And then? Margaret suggested I take a break, let Melissa learn to handle Ethan alone. Said it would be better for everyone, especially Ethan. But why didn't you try to stay in touch? I did. I called repeatedly. But Margaret always answered and said Melissa didn't want to speak to me, that Ethan was better off without me around. Dorothy felt a mix of anger and sorrow. Margaret had destroyed a family for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Mr. Wilson, Ethan asks about you every day. He thinks you left because he was too naughty. Tears streamed down the man's face. My God, what have I done? How could I have believed that woman? Do you still love your family? More than anything in the world. Not a day goes by that I don't think about Ethan and Melissa. Then you need to fight for them. Ethan needs his father, and Melissa deserves to know the truth. But how? Margaret will try to stop me again. Leave that to me. Dorothy Parker knew she was stepping into a complicated situation, but she couldn't stand seeing Ethan suffer when a solution was within reach. She returned home with a plan in mind, but first, she needed more evidence about Margaret's manipulations. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Over the following days, Dorothy observed Margaret more closely. She noticed the housekeeper always intercepted phone calls and checked the mail before handing it to Melissa. One afternoon, while Margaret was at the supermarket, Dorothy decided to check the house's landline. In the call history, she found several calls to the same number, Brian's number, which she had noted down. This meant Brian really was trying to reach out, but Margaret was blocking the calls. Dorothy also noticed something disturbing. Margaret had started giving Ethan little gifts, candies, cookies, and special juices that left the boy drowsy and uninterested in playing. "Ethan, don't you want to play outside?" Dorothy suggested one afternoon. "I don't feel like it," the boy replied, his words dragging. "I'm tired." Dorothy watched Margaret prepare another special juice for Ethan and decided to act. When the housekeeper left the kitchen, she tasted the juice. It had a strange bitter flavor. Something was definitely mixed in. That night, Dorothy confronted Margaret. "What are you putting in Ethan's food?" "What are you talking about?" Margaret replied, feigning offense. "The juice you give him every day. It tastes strange." "They're vitamins. Ethan is a very restless child. He needs extra nutrients." "What kind of vitamins make a child drowsy?" "You're imagining things." "Margaret, if you're drugging that child—" "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" Margaret shouted. "I'll tell Melissa about these absurd accusations." Dorothy knew she'd struck a nerve, but she also knew Margaret would use this against her. The next morning, as expected, Melissa called her for a talk. "Dorothy, Margaret told me you accused her of giving Ethan drugs. This is very serious." "Mrs. Wilson, I only said the juice she prepares makes Ethan unusually drowsy. It's not normal for a 4-year-old to be that apathetic. Ethan has always been a calm child when he's not up to mischief. But have you noticed he only stays calm after drinking what Margaret makes?" Melissa grew thoughtful. She had noticed Ethan seemed different lately, less energetic, less interested in playing. "What are you suggesting?" "That you take Ethan to the doctor for some tests, just to be sure everything's all right." "Do you really think it's necessary?" "I think it doesn't hurt to check." Melissa agreed to schedule an appointment with Ethan's pediatrician. Margaret was visibly agitated when she found out. "I don't understand all this fuss," she muttered. "Ethan is fine. This woman is making problems where there aren't any." On the day of the appointment, Dorothy offered to take Ethan while Melissa was in an important meeting. Dr. Robert Johnson, the family's pediatrician for 3 years, examined Ethan carefully. "When did this drowsiness start?" he asked Dorothy. "The past few weeks he's very lethargic, especially after meals, and his general behavior. He was getting into a lot of mischief, but lately he's been quieter, too calm for a child his age." Dr. Robert ran some tests at the office and took blood for more detailed analysis. "We'll wait for the results, but I want you to keep a close eye on what Ethan eats and drinks. If there's anything unusual in his system, the tests will detect it." When they got home, Margaret was restless. "How was the appointment?" she asked anxiously. "Normal," Dorothy replied. "The doctor just wants to monitor Ethan's development." "Of course. I always said there was no reason to worry." But Dorothy noticed that from that day on, Margaret stopped offering Ethan her special juices. 3 days later, Dr. Robert called with the test results. "Melissa, I need to speak with you in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" The doctor's serious tone frightened Melissa, who immediately cancelled her plans and went to the office with Dorothy. "Ethan's tests showed traces of diphenhydramine in his blood," Dr. Robert explained. "What is that?" Melissa asked, pale. "It's an antihistamine that causes drowsiness. It's found in some allergy medications and sleep aids." "But Ethan doesn't take any medicine." "Someone was giving it to him. The amounts weren't dangerous, but they explain the lethargy and change in behavior." Melissa looked at Dorothy, who kept a neutral expression. "Doctor, could this have harmed Ethan?" "Not permanently, but a 4-year-old shouldn't be medicated without a prescription." "Do you have any idea how he could have ingested this?" Melissa shook her head, but Dorothy knew exactly how. On the way home, Melissa was visibly shaken. "Dorothy, do you suspect someone?" "Mrs. Melissa, that's your decision. But I suggest you pay close attention to who prepares Ethan's food and drinks." That night at dinner, Melissa discreetly watched Margaret's every move. When the housekeeper offered juice to Ethan, Melissa intervened. "Ethan, how about water tonight?" "But he always has juice with dinner," Margaret insisted. "It's part of his routine. I think it's better to mix things up a little." Margaret grew visibly nervous but didn't push further. After Ethan went to bed, Melissa decided to investigate. She went to the kitchen and checked the ingredients Margaret used to prepare Ethan's drinks. In Margaret's cupboard, she found a bottle of sleeping pills, exactly the kind of medication that contained diphenhydramine. The next morning, Melissa confronted Margaret. "I found this in your cupboard," she said, holding up the pill bottle. "They're mine. I have trouble sleeping." "Margaret, Ethan had this substance in his blood." Margaret paled but tried to stay calm. "I don't know how that's possible. Maybe it was cross-contamination." "Cross-contamination? You were drugging my son, Margaret." "No, I only wanted him to be calmer, easier to take care of. It was a tiny amount." The confession slipped out before Margaret could stop herself. "My God, Margaret, how could you do such a thing? You don't understand. Ethan was impossible. No maid could stand working here. I was trying to help." "Help? By drugging a 4-year-old? Ethan, who had come downstairs for breakfast, heard the argument and hid behind the kitchen door. "Melissa, you don't know how to handle this boy," Margaret snapped. "Ever since Brian left, you've had no control over Ethan. I was just doing what was necessary." "Brian didn't leave on his own, did he?" Margaret realized she'd said too much. "Of course he did. He said it was best for everyone." "Liar!" Ethan shouted, stepping out from behind the door. "You told Dad I didn't love him anymore." Everyone turned to see the boy standing at the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down his face. "Ethan, sweetheart," Melissa began. "I heard you fighting that day," Ethan continued, looking straight at Margaret. "You told Dad I said I didn't want him at home anymore, but I never said that." Margaret turned pale as a sheet. "Ethan, you must have misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand. I was hiding behind the couch. You lied to Dad." Melissa knelt beside her son. "Ethan, what else do you remember from that day?" "You were crying in your room. Margaret went in and said Dad was right, that he was ruining our family, but you didn't want him to leave." The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Melissa's mind. Margaret had manipulated both her and Brian, using Ethan as an excuse to tear the family apart. "Why, Margaret? Why did you do this?" Cornered, Margaret finally revealed the truth. "Because this family needed me. Neither of you knew how to take care of Ethan properly. He needed someone strong, someone who truly cared about him. And you thought that person was you. I took care of this boy more than anyone. When you fought, who was there? When Ethan misbehaved, who handled it? Me. Always me. But you were creating the problems just to solve them. I was protecting Ethan from incompetent parents." Ethan, who had listened to everything, stepped closer to Margaret with a look of disgust. "You weren't protecting me. You hurt me. I wanted my dad back, and you wouldn't let me. Ethan, I did everything for you. No, you lied. You made Dad leave, and you made me take medicine to sleep." Dorothy, who had watched silently until now, finally spoke up. "Melissa, I have something to show you." Dorothy reached into her bag and pulled out the phone she'd found in Margaret's room, along with the crumpled papers she'd retrieved from the trash. "I found these messages between Margaret and Brian. She convinced him it would be better for Ethan if he left." Melissa read the messages and the draft emails, growing more furious by the second. "Margaret, you destroyed my family." "I was trying to save your family. Couldn't you see Ethan needed stability?" "The stability you created involved drugging my child and keeping him from his father. I never hurt Ethan. Everything I did was for his good." "For your good," Dorothy corrected. "You wanted control over this family and used Ethan to get it." Ethan moved closer to his mother and hugged her. "Mom, can you call Dad? I want to say sorry for him leaving because of me." "Sweetheart, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." Melissa glared at Margaret with a mix of anger and disgust. "I want you out of my house now." "Melissa, you're making a mistake. Who's going to take care of Ethan when you travel? Who's going to keep order in this house?" "I'll take care of my son, like I always should have." Margaret played her last card. What if Brian doesn't want to come back? What if he's moved on? Ethan looked at Dorothy, who gave him an encouraging smile. "He wants to come back," Dorothy said calmly. "He never stopped loving you." Melissa stared at Dorothy in surprise. "How do you know that?" "Because I spoke to him." The revelation brought a tense silence to the kitchen. "You did what?" Melissa asked. I found his number and arranged a meeting. He's desperate to see Ethan and ask for your forgiveness. Dorothy, you had no right. I know. But a child deserves to have his father around when the father wants to be there. Ethan tugged his mother's hand. Mom, please call Dad. Melissa looked at her son, then at Dorothy, and finally at Margaret, who stood in the doorway with a defeated expression. Okay, I'll call him. Margaret left the house that same day, taking only her personal clothes and a bitter expression on her face. You'll regret this, she said before leaving. This family will fall back into chaos without me. Maybe, replied Melissa, but it'll be our chaos, and we'll handle it together. That afternoon, Brian Wilson rang the doorbell of the house where he had lived for 5 years and from which he had been away for an entire year. Ethan opened the door and stood still for a few seconds, just staring at his father. Then, without saying a word, he threw himself into Brian's arms and began to cry. Daddy, I missed you. Why did you leave? Because I made a huge mistake, son, but I promise I'll never leave again. Melissa appeared at the door, nervous but relieved. Seeing Ethan in his father's arms reminded her of how happy they used to be. Hi, Melissa, said Brian, still holding Ethan. Hi, Brian. The first meeting was tense and full of tears. Brian apologized for believing Margaret's manipulations. Melissa apologized for not realizing what was happening. Ethan, in turn, shared everything he had been through, the mischief to get attention, the fear that his mother might also leave, the confusion he felt not understanding why his father had gone. Son, I never wanted to leave. I thought it would be better for you, but I was completely wrong. Are you coming back to live here? Brian looked at Melissa, who averted her gaze. Let's take it slow, Ethan. First, Dad and Mom need to talk a lot and get to know each other again. In the following days, Brian began visiting Ethan daily. Dorothy watched the family's progress with satisfaction. Ethan had completely stopped his destructive mischief. He was still an energetic and playful child, but he no longer felt the need to seek attention through negative behavior. Dorothy, Melissa said one morning, I wanted to thank you. Why, ma'am? For fighting for my family when I didn't even know I needed to fight. Ethan deserved to have his father back, and I deserved to know the truth. About Margaret, about Brian, about everything. Dorothy smiled and continued her work. For the first time in months, the house truly felt like a home. 2 weeks later, during a family dinner, the first in over a year, Ethan made an announcement. I want Dorothy to be my pretend grandma. Everyone laughed, but Dorothy was moved. Why pretend grandma? Asked Brian. Because she took care of me when I was sad and you weren't together, just like a grandma does. Dorothy discreetly wiped away tears. After losing her own son years ago, caring for Ethan had healed a wound she thought would never mend. It would be an honor to be your pretend grandma, she told Ethan, but the challenges weren't over yet. A few weeks later, Margaret returned. She rang the doorbell on a rainy afternoon, looking worn and pleading. Melissa, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about, Margaret. Please, just 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, Melissa let Margaret in. Ethan, who was playing in the living room, immediately hid behind Dorothy when he saw the former housekeeper. I came to apologize, Margaret began. I know I made mistakes, but everything I did was because I love this family. Margaret, you lied, manipulated, and drugged my son. That's not love. I was confused. I thought I knew what was best for Ethan, and now, changed your mind. Margaret looked at Ethan, who stared back with fear and distrust. Now I see you're happy without me, and that hurts deeply. Margaret, you created this problem. You tore a family apart because you wanted to feel important. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was selfish. Ethan stepped closer to Margaret, but kept his distance. Why did you lie to my daddy? Margaret knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. Because I was scared, Ethan. Scared that your family wouldn't need me anymore. But you could have kept working here without lying. I know it was wrong, very wrong. Very. Ethan looked at his mother, then at Dorothy, and finally back at Margaret. You hurt me a lot. I know, and I'm so sorry. And you hurt my daddy and mommy too. I know. Ethan was thoughtful for a moment. Are you going to do it again? Never again, I promise. How can I believe you? The simple question from a 4-year-old left Margaret speechless. How could she prove she had changed? I understand if you can't forgive me, said Margaret, standing up. But I want you to know I'm truly sorry. Margaret, Melissa interrupted, I hope you get help. What you did wasn't normal. I know. I'm already seeing a therapist. Margaret headed for the door, but Ethan called out to her. Margaret? Yes, Ethan? I forgive you, but I don't want you to come back to work here. I understand. Thank you for forgiving me. After Margaret left, Ethan went to his mother. Mommy, did I do the right thing by forgiving her? You did, sweetheart. Forgiving is important so you don't hold anger in your heart. But I don't want her to come back, and she won't. Our family is complete now. Indeed, a few weeks later, Brian moved back into the house. He and Melissa decided to take their relationship slow, but Ethan was overjoyed to have his father home. Dorothy continued working for the family, but her role had expanded. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore, but a mother figure to Ethan and a confidant to Melissa and Brian. Dorothy, Brian said one morning, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for our family. No need to thank me. You've given me a family too. What do you mean? When I lost my son, I thought I'd never get to be a mother to anyone again. Taking care of Ethan gave me a purpose I hadn't had in years. Brian smiled and hugged Dorothy. Then we're the ones who should be thanking you. Months later, the house was unrecognizable. The walls, once covered in scribbles, stayed clean because Ethan now had a special corner for his artwork. Melissa had arranged with her company to work part-time from home, allowing her to spend more time with Ethan. Ethan's mischief had turned into positive creativity. He was still an energetic child, but he channeled it into constructive activities, painting, building with blocks, and most of all, spending time with his parents. You know what's funny? Melissa said to Dorothy one afternoon. Ethan doesn't do any destructive mischief anymore, and I don't understand how I didn't see before that he was crying out for help. Sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of us when we're overwhelmed, Dorothy replied. What matters is that you see it now. And if you hadn't come along, someone would have. Ethan deserved to be heard, and eventually, someone would have listened. On Ethan's first birthday after the family's reconciliation, they threw a small but special party. Brian had planned every detail, including a cake with Ethan's favorite design. A family of 4, Daddy, Mommy, Ethan, and Grandma Dorothy. Ethan, Brian said during the party, Daddy has a surprise for you. Ethan opened the gift and found a new photo album filled with all the family pictures that had been in the scribbled one. But this time, the photos were untouched, and there was space for many new ones. To document our new family, Brian explained. Ethan hugged his father tightly. Daddy, do you promise you'll never leave again? I promise, son. And this time, it's a promise I know I can keep. Dorothy watched the scene with tears in her eyes. The family she had found broken was now stronger than ever. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Melissa and Brian talked about the future. Do you really think we can make it work this time? Melissa asked. I think we're wiser now. We can recognize when someone's trying to manipulate us. And most importantly, we know how to talk about our problems instead of keeping everything to ourselves. And Ethan? Ethan is happy. Look at him. He's back to being the cheerful little boy he always was. It was true. Ethan had started laughing freely again, asking endless questions about everything, hugging and kissing his parents for no particular reason. The mischief was still there, but it was normal kid mischief, playing in the mud, building crazy forts with pillows, trying to teach tricks to Popcorn. Dorothy had changed too. The pain of losing her own son would never fully disappear, but caring for Ethan had given her a new reason to smile. She had become part of the family in a way she'd never imagined possible. Dorothy, Ethan said one morning, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you have kids? Dorothy hesitated for a moment. It was a question that always hurt, but coming from Ethan, it felt different. I did have a son, yes, but he's not here anymore. Did he die? Yes. Ethan thought for a few minutes. So now you take care of me, right? If you want me to. I do. You can be my second mom. Dorothy hugged Ethan tenderly. It would be an honor to be your second mom. The Wilson family's transformation didn't go unnoticed by neighbors and friends. Melissa, who used to be stressed and always rushing, now seemed calmer and more present. Brian, who had grown depressed during their separation, returned to being the cheerful, loving man everyone knew. But the biggest change was in Ethan. His daycare teachers remarked on how he had become a more cooperative and happy child. There were no more reports of behavioral issues, and he often spoke about his family with pride. My family is special, Ethan told his teacher. I have Daddy, Mommy, and Grandma Dorothy, and they all love me so much. One day, about 6 months after the reconciliation, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from Margaret. Dear Wilson family, I'm writing to let you know I'm doing well and still in therapy. My psychologist helped me understand why I acted the way I did. I've been afraid of abandonment since childhood, and I projected that fear onto Ethan. I want you to know I'll never interfere in your lives again. I've learned that loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it means staying away. Ethan, if you ever read this letter, know that I truly love you, but I understand that real love sometimes means letting go. Melissa and Brian, I apologize once more for nearly destroying your family. I hope you'll be very happy together. Dorothy, thank you for correcting my mistakes and taking such good care of Ethan. With love and regret, Margaret. Melissa read the letter aloud to the family during dinner. What do you think? She asked. I think she really has changed, Brian said. But I agree it's better if she stays away. Ethan, now 5 and better able to understand things, gave his opinion. I'm glad she's not sad anymore, but I'm also glad she's not coming back. Why, sweetheart? Because our family is perfect just the way it is. Dorothy smiled. A child's wisdom could be surprising sometimes. On Christmas Eve that year, the Wilson family held a special celebration. It was their first full Christmas in 2 years, and everyone was emotional. Ethan had made gifts for all of them, colorful drawings with loving messages written with Dorothy's help. For his father, he drew the 2 of them playing ball. For his mother, a drawing of them cooking together. And for Dorothy, a drawing where she appeared as an angel watching over him. Why did you draw me as an angel? Dorothy asked. Because you came when I needed you most, just like angels do. Brian and Melissa exchanged an emotional glance. Their children were creating happy memories again. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, the 3 adults stayed talking in the living room. Do you think we made any mistakes today? Melissa asked, referencing past arguments. We make small mistakes every day, Brian replied. The difference is now we talk about them instead of letting them pile up. And we have Dorothy to give us an outside perspective when we need it, Melissa added. I'm not perfect, Dorothy said, but I promise to always speak up if something doesn't feel right. Even if it's hard to hear, Brian asked, especially when it's hard to hear. The following year brought new challenges, but also new joys. Ethan started at a new school where he quickly made friends. His teachers praised his behavior and creativity. Melissa got a promotion at work, but negotiated to keep her flexible schedule so she could still be present in Ethan's life. Brian decided to start his own business, an educational toy store. The idea came after noticing how Ethan thrived with creative activities rather than electronic toys. Dorothy continued working for the family, but her role had grown far beyond housekeeping. She became the family's confidant, the one they all turned to for advice or simply a listening ear. Dorothy, Ethan said one day, now 6 years old, when I grow up, I want to be like you. How so, sweetheart? I want to help sad families be happy again. Dorothy hugged Ethan, fulfilled to see how positively the child had grown. You already help our family be happy every day, she said, just by being you. On the 2nd anniversary of Brian's return home, the family took a special trip, their first family vacation in 3 years. They went to a farm in Vermont where Ethan got to meet animals, ride horses, and run freely through the fields. Daddy, Ethan said while fishing at the farm's pond. Do you remember when I was bad? You were never bad, son. You were sad and confused, but I made a lot of messes. And now do you understand why you did that? Ethan thought for a moment. Because I was scared you'd leave like Daddy did. And now? Now I know you love me and won't leave. Exactly. And do you know how we know you love us? How? Because you don't need to make messes to get our attention anymore. You know you can just talk to us. Ethan smiled and focused on fishing. A few minutes later, he caught his first fish. Look, Daddy, I did it! Ethan's joyful shout echoed across the pond, and Brian thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world, his son's genuine laughter. That night on the farm's porch, while Ethan slept, Melissa and Brian talked about the future. Sometimes I'm afraid this is all a dream, Melissa confessed. Why? Because we're so happy. It feels impossible that we made it through all that. We made it because we fought for it, and because we had Dorothy's help. She saved our family. We saved our family. Dorothy just showed us the way. Do you think Ethan will remember everything that happened? I think he'll remember the love. And that's what matters. Melissa agreed. The most important thing was that Ethan was growing up in a family full of love, communication, and honesty. On the last day of the trip, Ethan made a special request. Can I take a rock from this farm for Dorothy? Of course. But why? So she'll always remember that our family is as strong as a rock. Brian and Melissa exchanged glances, touched by their son's thoughtfulness. When they returned home, Ethan gave Dorothy the rock and a letter he had dictated to his father. Dear Grandma Dorothy, this rock is to remind you that our family is strong and that you'll always be a part of it. Thank you for taking care of me when I was sad. I love you so much, Ethan. Dorothy kept the rock and the letter like precious treasures. Ethan, she said, this is the most beautiful rock I've ever received. Is it really that special? It's the most special of all because it came from your heart. Years passed. Ethan grew into a responsible and caring teenager. He never had behavioral issues again and always maintained close relationships with everyone in the family. Dorothy aged gracefully, always present for the important moments in Ethan's life: graduations, birthdays, sports achievements. Melissa and Brian renewed their wedding vows on Ethan's 10th birthday in a simple backyard ceremony, with Ethan as the best man and Dorothy as the matron of honor. Mom, Ethan asked after the ceremony, are you two going to stay together forever now? We'll stay together as long as we love each other, Melissa replied. And if you stop loving each other, then we'll talk about it as a family, Brian said. No lies, no manipulation, just honesty. And will Dorothy keep living with us? As long as she wants to, Melissa assured him. Ethan smiled, satisfied with their answers. When he turned 15, he organized a special party for Dorothy himself. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because today marks 10 years since you came into our home. It's the anniversary of our real family. Dorothy cried with emotion. In 10 years, she had watched Ethan transform from a confused, rebellious child into a mature and happy young man. Ethan, she said during the party, do you know what the best day of my life was? Which one? The day you first called me Grandma. And do you know what the best day of my life was? Which one? The day you came here and stayed even though I caused so much trouble. The party went on late into the night, filled with funny stories about Ethan's childhood, old photos and lots of laughter. Dorothy, Melissa said before everyone went to bed, thank you for persisting even when everything seemed impossible. Thank you for letting me be part of this family. You're not part of it, Ethan corrected, hugging Dorothy. You are part of it, forever. End of story. And now, dear listeners, we'd love to know, what did you think of this story of resilience and family love? Do you believe Dorothy made the right choices by stepping into the Wilson family's life? Share your honest thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. If you know a similar story or have been through something like this, tell us about it. Don't forget to like this video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.